The thick, humid air of a Carolina summer hung heavy over Sycamore Ridge, a neighborhood where the sprawling canopies of mature oak and maple trees offered dappled shade, but couldn't entirely dissipate the undercurrents of tension that often simmered beneath the surface. Much of this friction emanated, directly or indirectly, from the Vigilant Homeowners Association and its various committees. For Captain Ben Carter, commander of the county sheriff's sensitive internal affairs unit, and his wife Rachael, now 31 weeks pregnant with their eagerly anticipated first child, their recently purchased house on Willow Lane was intended as a sanctuary, a peaceful haven needed before the joyful chaos of parenthood commenced. Ben's demanding job required him to maintain unwavering calm and objectivity while investigating allegations of misconduct, corruption, and abuse of power within the ranks of law enforcement. He confronted misuses of authority daily. He never imagined he would encounter such a petty, yet profoundly dangerous, manifestation of it so disturbingly close to home, threatening the person he loved most. Rachael, nesting instincts in full force, focused wholly on preparing their home and hearts for the baby's arrival, simply craved tranquility, a respite from the world's sharp edges. That precious tranquility, however, was frequently jeopardized by the formidable presence of Judith Albright. As the imperious, unchallenged chair of the HOA Grounds Committee, Judith possessed an almost proprietary view of Sycamore Ridge's shared spaces. She saw the manicured lawns, the community garden plots, the pool area, not as amenities for residents to enjoy, but as her personal domain, a territory to be fiercely guarded against any perceived slight or infraction against the voluminous community covenants. A woman whose stern, unyielding demeanor was perfectly matched by her rigid, often idiosyncratic, interpretation of those governing documents. Judith harbored a particular suspicion of newcomers and possessed a sharp, ready tongue for anyone she deemed out of compliance. Out of compliance could encompass anything from leaving a garden hose visible after watering plants to parking a vehicle with tires touching the white line of a designated space, or even allowing children's laughter to carry too loudly near the quiet zone benches. Her patrols of the grounds, conducted with the intensity of a drill sergeant inspecting barracks, were legendary among residents and widely dreaded. One sweltering Tuesday morning, the air already thick and promising record heat, Rachael decided to tackle the accumulated recycling. She gathered the flattened cardboard boxes and meticulously rinsed plastic containers, loading them carefully into a reusable tote bag. Moving slowly, deliberately, in the oppressive heat, her hand resting frequently on the firm curve of her swollen belly, she made her way towards the communal recycling bins located near the far back corner of the extensive community property. The bins were situated adjacent to a drab, windowless, cinder-block HOA maintenance shed where lawnmowers, gardening tools, fertilizers, and various operational supplies were stored. She began carefully sorting her items into the appropriate large, wheeled receptacles, cardboard in one, plastics in another, glass in a third, the mundane task requiring more effort than usual in her advanced stage of pregnancy. She was focused on the task, trying to finish quickly before the sun climbed higher, and didn't notice Judith Albright approaching stealthily across the dew-damp grass until the woman was almost directly upon her. Judith stood with arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face set in a familiar mask of stern disapproval, eyes narrowed into judgmental slits. "Excuse me," Judith's voice sliced through the quiet morning air, sharp and abrasive, startling Rachael mid-sort. "This recycling facility is strictly designated for the use of Sycamore Ridge residents currently in good standing with their association dues. We have been experiencing significant problems recently with unauthorized individuals from outside the community dumping their refuse here." Rachael, caught off guard, turned, managing a polite, albeit slightly strained, smile. The heat was already making her feel flushed and uncomfortable. "Oh, hello. Good morning. Yes, of course. We live just over on Willow Lane. Number 14. We just moved in a few months ago, back in March." She offered a hand tentatively. "I'm Rachael Carter. Nice to meet you officially." Judith ignored the offered hand completely. Her sharp, gray eyes narrowed further, conducting a slow, deliberate, and offensively skeptical visual sweep over Rachael's visibly pregnant form. The appraisal felt invasive, judgmental. "Carter, Judith repeated the name slowly, as if tasting something unpleasant. I don't recall seeing that name prominently on the recent roster of fully compliant homeowners cleared for facility access this week. And frankly, she added, her tone dripping with insinuation, you don't look familiar at all. We get all sorts trying to utilize our services without contributing their fair share. People concoct all manner of elaborate stories. The unfounded accusation hung heavy and poisonous in the humid air. Freeload? I assure you, Ms. Albright, Rachael replied, struggling to keep her voice even, though a prickle of indignation mixed with a growing sense of unease rose within her. We are residents. In good standing. My husband is Ben Carter. He works for the Sheriff's Department. You can easily verify our residency with the main HOA management office if you have any concerns. She gestured towards the main clubhouse visible in the distance. I don't need to check with anyone, Judith snapped dismissively, taking a step closer, invading Rachael's personal space. The heavy wooden door to the maintenance shed directly behind Rachael stood slightly ajar, apparently left open by a groundskeeper who had been working earlier. I am the chair of the grounds committee. I know perfectly well who belongs here and who doesn't. It's people like you. Judith's voice began to rise, her face flushing an angry red, who think you can just waltz in, ignore the rules, use our amenities, take advantage of the services funded by responsible homeowners. It's an outrage. Before Rachael could fully process the escalating hostility or attempt to step away, Judith suddenly, violently, lunged forward. It wasn't merely a dismissive push. It was a deliberate, forceful shove aimed directly at Rachael's upper chest and shoulders. Caught completely off balance, pregnant, and already unsteady in the heat, Rachael stumbled backward helplessly. Her feet tangled on the uneven threshold, and she fell awkwardly, not onto the grass, but through the open doorway and into the dim, musty confines of the maintenance shed behind her. The unexpected momentum carried her several feet inside, landing her heavily amongst dusty bags of fertilizer, rusty shovels, and the sharp, acrid smell of gasoline from a nearby mower. With shocking, terrifying speed, before Rachael could even cry out or attempt to scramble back up, Judith slammed the heavy wooden shed door shut with a resounding thud. The sudden plunge into near-total darkness was disorienting, terrifying. Rachael heard the distinct, metallic scrape and then the definitive, sharp click of a heavy padlock being snapped securely onto the exterior hasp. She was locked in. That'll teach you to trespass on private association property. Judith's voice, muffled but laced with triumphant malice, yelled from the other side of the thick wooden door. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to freeload off hardworking residents. Consider this a lesson in respecting community regulations. Disoriented, breathless, and consumed by a sudden, paralyzing terror, Rachael struggled clumsily to her feet in the stifling darkness. Let me out. Open this door. What are you doing? I live here. I told you. She began pounding frantically on the thick, unyielding door, but the sound was distressingly muffled, absorbed by the solid wood. Panic seized her, cold and sharp, constricting her chest. The air inside the windowless shed was stagnant, oppressively hot already, thick with the cloying smell of gasoline fumes, damp earth, and mildew. Dust motes danced visibility only in the single, thin sliver of bright daylight visible under the bottom edge of the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She fumbled desperately in the pocket of her maternity sundress for her phone, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Screen illuminated. One flickering bar of signal. Barely there. She had to call Ben. Now. Her fingers shook so badly she misdialed twice before finally connecting to his direct line at the sheriff's office. Ben was chairing a complex disciplinary review board meeting, reviewing internal investigation findings on a sensitive use-of-force case. He usually silenced his personal cell during such proceedings, adhering strictly to protocol. But he had one exception. Rachael's calls were always set to bypass silent mode, an ingrained precaution since her pregnancy began. He saw her name flash on the screen and felt an immediate, low-level thrum of concern. She rarely called him at work unless it was important. Excusing himself quietly but quickly from the meeting, he stepped out into the quiet, air-conditioned hallway. Rachael? Hey, everything okay? He answered, keeping his voice calm, professional. Ben, help me, please. Her voice came through thin, breathless, choked with raw panic and pain. "Judith Albright, the HOA woman. She pushed me, locked me, in the maintenance shed, the one near the recycling bins, padlock. I can't get out. Ben, it's so hot, the baby." Her voice broke on a sharp intake of breath. "Oh God." "Ben." Sudden pain, really sharp, down low. "I think." The line crackled with static, then went abruptly, terrifyingly dead. Signal lost in the Meadowland cinderblock shed. In that instant, every ounce of Ben Carter's carefully cultivated professional calm, his years of disciplined objectivity, evaporated completely. It was replaced by the raw, primal terror of a husband, an impending father, whose pregnant wife was trapped, injured, and in distress. Judith Albright. Maintenance shed. Locked in. Pregnant. Pain. Signal lost. The words slammed into his consciousness like physical blows. He was already moving, sprinting down the hallway towards the elevators, simultaneously keying his police radio, his voice tight, urgent, overriding the current channel traffic with his command authority. "Dispatch, this is Captain Carter, Internal Affairs. Declaring critical incident. I need immediate Sheriff's Unit assistance. Dispatched code 3 to Sycamore Ridge Community Grounds, intersection of Oak Knoll and Ridgetop Lane, vicinity of the communal recycling area and maintenance shed structure. Possible felony kidnapping in progress. Victim is pregnant female locked inside structure by suspect identified as Judith Albright, HOA Committee Chair. Victim is my wife." His voice cracked slightly on the word, reporting medical distress before communication loss. He took a steadying breath. Dispatching Deputies Miller and Chin, code 3 response requested. Advise EMS paramedics to stage nearby. Await scene security confirmation. I am en route. ETA approximately 6 minutes. He sprinted through the lobby, acknowledging the startled looks of colleagues with a curt nod, and burst out into the sweltering heat of the parking lot, heading directly for his unmarked departmental vehicle. He activated the emergency lights and siren the moment he cleared the parking structure, weaving through midday traffic with practiced, urgent skill, his mind racing through tactical procedures while his heart hammered against his ribs with sickening force. He knew Judith Albright by reputation within the department. Several minor, unsubstantiated harassment complaints had been filed against her by residents over the years, dismissed due to lack of evidence or deemed civil matters outside sheriff's jurisdiction. She was known as a petty tyrant, drunk on the minuscule power her HOA position afforded her. But this? Physically assaulting and locking a heavily pregnant woman in a shed? This crossed a line into dangerous, malicious criminality he hadn't fully anticipated, even from her. He pictured Rachael, alone, terrified, possibly injured or going into premature labor, trapped in that stifling, potentially hazardous shed. The image fueled a cold, focused rage. Deputies Miller and Chin, both experienced road patrol officers who recognized the gravity of a captain declaring a personal critical incident involving his pregnant wife, arrived on scene with remarkable speed, sirens screaming, tires crunching on the gravel access road near the recycling area just moments before Ben skidded his own vehicle to a halt behind them. The scene that greeted them was surreal, bizarre. They found Judith Albright standing approximately 20 feet away from the closed, padlocked maintenance shed. She held her smartphone high, aimed generally towards the shed and the arriving patrol cars, clearly live streaming to some online platform. Her voice, amplified slightly by the phone's microphone, carried across the neatly trimmed grass, shrill and filled with self-righteous indignation. Taking back control of our neighborhood from those who disrespect our rules, she was proclaiming loudly, seemingly oblivious, or perhaps defiantly aware, of the two patrol cars now flanking her, lights flashing. This individual refused to provide proper identification upon request, exhibited belligerent behavior, and was clearly trespassing with intent to utilize community services without authorization. I performed a lawful citizen's detainment by securing her in this utility structure until appropriate authorities could arrive and handle the situation. We have to protect our community standards. We have to protect our shared investment from these freeloaders. She seemed completely convinced of her own justification, wrapped in a bubble of perceived authority. "Ma'am, Sheriff's Department, put the phone down slowly and show me your hands. Now." Deputy Miller commanded loudly, approaching her cautiously but purposefully, his hand hovering near his service weapon. Deputy Chin moved simultaneously to cover him from a slightly different angle. Judith lowered the phone slightly, irritation flashing across her flushed face, seemingly annoyed by the interruption to her broadcast. "Officers. Finally. Took you long enough?" This woman, she gestured vaguely, dismissively, towards the silent shed, is locked securely in there. Trespassing on private association grounds. Refused to cooperate. I secured the scene appropriately pending your arrival. Ben was already out of his car, ignoring Judith entirely for the moment. His entire focus narrowed laser-like onto the heavy, brass-colored padlock securing the shed door. His heart pounded with dread. "Bolt cutters. Get the cutters." Now, he yelled hoarsely to Deputy Chin, who immediately retrieved the heavy-duty cutters from the trunk of his patrol car. The sharp, resonant clang of the hardened steel jaws slicing cleanly through the thick metal shackle of the padlock echoed unnervingly in the suddenly tense silence. Ben wrenched the severed lock off the hasp and threw the heavy shed door open with forceful urgency. The sight inside stole his breath, confirmed his worst fears. Rachael was slumped against the far wall, half sitting, half lying amidst dusty gardening tools, her face shockingly pale and beaded with sweat in the dim, stifling interior. Her hands were wrapped tightly, protectively, around her prominent belly. She was breathing in shallow, rapid gasps, her eyes wide with a mixture of excruciating pain and overwhelming fear. "Ben," she whispered, her voice barely audible, relief flooding her features even as another visible wave of pain contorted them. "The baby hurts." "Rachael, I'm here. I'm right here." Ben rushed to her side instantly, kneeling beside her on the dusty concrete floor, his voice deliberately gentle despite the adrenaline roaring through his veins. "Paramedics are right here, honey. They're coming right now. Just try to breathe slowly. Deep breaths." As the paramedics, who had been staged nearby, skillfully entered the shed and began their urgent assessment of Rachael, checking her vitals, monitoring the baby's heart rate, and preparing her carefully for transport, Ben stood up slowly, his gaze finding Judith Albright. She was now being firmly, physically detained by Deputy Miller, still sputtering indignantly about HOA regulations, her right to protect community property, and demanding to speak to his supervisor. "Secure her phone immediately as evidence," Ben ordered Miller, his voice dangerously quiet, devoid of inflection but heavy with command authority. His eyes scanned the dim interior of the shed. He then noticed it, a small, dome-shaped security camera mounted high on the inside wall near the ceiling, pointed directly towards the door area. Likely an internal HOA measure against tool theft. "Miller," Ben continued, his mind already working, "get HOA President Martinez on the phone. Now. Tell him Captain Carter requires immediate administrative access to the security footage feed from inside this maintenance shed, priority 1. Last 24 hours. Tell him refusal will result in a search warrant and potential obstruction charges." While Rachael was being carefully stabilized and loaded onto a stretcher for emergency transport to the hospital's high-risk obstetrics unit, Deputy Miller quickly contacted the HOA president, Mr. Martinez. Martinez, sounding flustered and panicked on the phone after hearing the nature of the incident and the captain's direct involvement, reluctantly provided the remote administrative login credentials for the shed's camera system. Ben watched intently over Miller's shoulder as the footage played back on the patrol car's laptop computer in the bright sunlight. The video evidence was chillingly clear, damning. It showed Rachael calmly placing items in the recycling bins. It showed Judith's aggressive approach, her angry gestures. It captured Judith's clear refusal to listen to Rachael's explanations. Then, horrifyingly, it showed the deliberate, forceful shove that sent Rachael stumbling backward into the shed. It clearly showed Judith slamming the heavy door shut and then, with grim, deliberate satisfaction, securing the heavy padlock onto the exterior hasp. But then Ben noticed something else. After securing the lock, Judith paused. She looked around furtively, then produced a small key from her pocket, quickly unlocked the padlock again, opened the door just a crack, reached inside towards the camera's location, though her hand movement was partially obscured, closed the door again, and resecured the padlock. Then, and only then, did she walk away a few feet and begin her live stream. She had removed the camera's local storage, the SD card. "She took the damn card," Ben muttered, a cold dread mixing with his anger. Judith knew about the camera and had tried to destroy the primary evidence. "Keep going back," Ben instructed Miller tensely, a horrible suspicion dawning. "Rewind the footage further. Check the logs for the past few months." Miller navigated the interface, scrolling back through archived recordings. And there it was. The system flagged several previous incidents. 3 months prior, Judith Albright captured arguing heatedly with a teenage girl who had apparently cut across the common lawn. Before forcefully ushering the visibly upset girl into the same shed and locking the door for nearly an hour before letting her out with a stern lecture. 6 months prior, Judith locking a bewildered-looking package delivery driver inside the shed after loudly accusing him of speeding through the neighborhood streets. Almost a year ago, another incident involving a female resident walking her small dog nearby, locked inside the shed for over 30 minutes following a dispute over designated pet relief areas. The footage was undeniable. Judith Albright wasn't just a neighborhood bully obsessed with rules. She was a serial perpetrator engaging in a clear, dangerous pattern of unlawful imprisonment, using the shed as her personal holding cell. Then felt a wave of nausea. How had this gone unreported, unaddressed for so long? Fear? Intimidation? Belief that complaining about the powerful grounds chair was futile? He looked over at Judith, now sitting sullenly in the back of Miller's patrol car, still radiating indignant defiance. Then he looked back at the laptop screen, his expression hardening into glacial resolve. "Book her," Ben said, his voice utterly flat now, devoid of emotion, though his hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. Felony kidnapping under Penal Code 207. Felony infliction of injury on a pregnant woman likely to result in termination. PC 273.5 related to fetal endangerment. 3 additional counts of felony false imprisonment. PC 236. Based on this archived footage. Felony assault, PC 240, for the initial shove. And add resisting arrest if she gives you any more trouble during transport. He paused. And Miller? Secure this laptop. That archived footage is critical, especially since she tampered with the primary evidence by removing the SD card from today's incident. Rachael was rushed to the nearest hospital with a high-level neonatal intensive care unit. Doctors worked urgently, administering medication to stop the premature contractions triggered by the severe physical stress, heat exposure, and extreme emotional distress she had endured. It was a terrifying, touch-and-go few hours, filled with uncertainty. But eventually, thanks to the swift medical intervention, both Rachael and the baby were stabilized. She would require strict bed rest and close monitoring for the remainder of her pregnancy, but the immediate crisis appeared to have been averted. The relief Ben felt was profound, but it was heavily tempered by the cold fury over what had been done to her and the chilling revelation of Judith's past actions. The investigation broadened rapidly. Detectives assigned to the case, pointedly from a unit outside Ben's Internal Affairs Command to avoid conflict of interest, interviewed Mr. Martinez, the HOA president. Martinez was initially evasive, attempting to downplay Judith's actions as an unfortunate overreaction by a passionate volunteer. He claimed ignorance of any prior incidents, despite HOA records showing at least 2 informal complaints had been lodged against Judith for overly aggressive behavior in the past year. Complaints Martinez himself had apparently dismissed without formal board review. When confronted with the archived shed camera footage showing the prior imprisonments, Martinez grew visibly agitated, stammering about needing to consult the HOA's legal counsel. His attempts to obstruct or minimize became increasingly apparent. Judith Albright's arraignment was swift and tense. Her court-appointed public defender attempted to argue for bail, portraying the incident as a gross misunderstanding, a misguided attempt by an elderly volunteer to handle perceived trespassing, exacerbated by the heat and stress. He emphasized Judith's lack of a prior criminal record and her ties to the community. The prosecutor countered forcefully, presenting the initial arresting officer's testimony, the details of Rachael's medical emergency and fetal distress, and crucially, introducing stills and summarized descriptions of the archived shed camera footage documenting the 3 prior false imprisonment incidents. This defendant, Your Honor, the prosecutor argued, his voice ringing with conviction, is not merely an overzealous volunteer. She demonstrates a clear, documented pattern of escalating aggression, intimidation, and a disturbing propensity for utilizing illegal confinement as a tool of personal power and punishment against anyone she perceives as challenging her authority or violating her narrow interpretation of community rules. Her deliberate actions against a visibly pregnant woman, resulting in immediate medical endangerment to both mother and child, demonstrate an appalling, callous disregard for human life and safety. The prosecutor continued, she specifically targeted Ms. Carter, physically assaulted her, and knowingly locked her in a confined, hazardous space, hot, poorly ventilated, containing potentially harmful chemicals. The prior incidents reveal this was not an isolated lapse in judgment under stress, but habitual, calculated criminal behavior. Furthermore, her documented attempt to destroy evidence by removing the camera's SD card immediately after the assault shows consciousness of guilt and a willingness to obstruct justice. She is, quite simply, a demonstrable danger to the residents of this community, particularly its vulnerable members. The judge, a stern-faced woman known for her no-nonsense approach, reviewed the evidence summary, her expression growing increasingly grim as she absorbed the details of the prior imprisonments. She looked piercingly at Judith Albright, who sat defiantly, refusing to meet the judge's gaze. "Ms. Albright," the judge stated finally, her voice cold and sharp, "based on the extraordinarily disturbing evidence presented today, particularly the documented pattern of repeated, predatory behavior involving unlawful imprisonment, and the calculated cruelty demonstrated towards a woman in an advanced and vulnerable state of pregnancy, compounded by evidence tampering, this court finds you pose a significant and undeniable flight risk and an ongoing, serious threat to public safety. Bail is denied." A gasp went through the small courtroom gallery. Judith Albright's face contorted in stunned disbelief, then flushed with impotent rage. She was led away in handcuffs by the bailiffs, remanded directly to the county jail to await trial, her illusions of untouchability shattered against the cold reality of the criminal justice system. News of her arrest, the denial of bail, and the shocking revelation of her past pattern of imprisoning residents and others sent seismic shockwaves through the Sycamore Ridge community. The HOA board immediately went into crisis mode, facing blistering criticism from residents, intense media scrutiny, and the very real threat of multiple costly lawsuits. Not only from the Carters, but potentially from the previously unnamed victims revealed by the security footage, who were now being actively sought by investigators. There were immediate, furious calls from homeowners for the entire board's resignation, demands for independent audits of HOA finances and practices, and petitions for state oversight of the association's governance. Months later, the trial commenced. The prosecution meticulously presented its case, hampered slightly by the missing SD card for the primary incident, but bolstered by the powerful archived footage of the prior imprisonments. They presented Rachael's compelling testimony, the paramedics' reports, the doctor's expert opinions on the fetal distress, and Ben's account. They established Judith's pattern, her motive, her opportunity. The defense, however, fought back vigorously, focusing relentlessly on the lack of direct video evidence for the specific assault and imprisonment of Rachael Carter due to the missing SD card. They argued the archived footage, while disturbing, didn't prove guilt in this specific instance. They attempted to discredit Rachael's account as exaggerated due to her condition. They suggested the shove might have been accidental during a heated argument, the locking of the door a panicked, irrational reaction rather than malicious intent. They emphasized Judith's long service to the community, painting her as a scapegoat for resident dissatisfaction with strict rules. Reasonable doubt seemed a tangible possibility. The jury looked conflicted. On the final day of testimony, just before closing arguments were scheduled, the lead prosecutor approached the bench with an urgent, whispered conference involving the judge and the defense counsel. Moments later, the judge reconvened the court, her expression intrigued. "The prosecution indicates it has just received potentially material new evidence that requires immediate consideration," the judge announced. Technician Laura Esposito recalled. The young forensic technician who had previously testified about the shed camera system returned to the stand, looking slightly bewildered but excited. "Ms. Esposito," the prosecutor began, "since your initial testimony regarding the shed camera and the missing SD card, have you conducted any further analysis of the HOA's overall security system architecture related to that specific camera unit?" "Yes, sir," Esposito replied. "During a final review of the system logs this morning, preparing exhibits for closing, I noticed something anomalous I had previously overlooked. While the primary local storage SD card was indeed removed, and the direct server logs for the freezer's IT sensor were wiped as previously established." She paused for effect. "The security camera itself, a newer model installed last year, apparently has a secondary, redundant backup feature." A hush fell over the courtroom. Judith Albright stiffened in her seat. Martinez, the HOA president sitting in the gallery, went visibly pale. "Please elaborate, Ms. Esposito," the prosecutor urged. "This camera model includes an encrypted, automatic cloud backup function," Esposito explained. "It uploads brief, motion-activated clips directly to a secure third-party cloud server leased by the HOA vendor, completely independent of the local SD card storage and the main HOA server logs. It's primarily intended for disaster recovery or redundancy if the local network goes down. According to the system architecture notes, this feature was activated by default upon installation. And were you able to access this cloud storage? Yes, sir. Using administrative credentials obtained via warrant from the system vendor this morning, bypassing the HOA's potentially compromised interface. We located encrypted video files timestamped to the exact time of the incident involving Ms. Carter. Have you decrypted and reviewed these files? I have, sir. The quality is excellent. Your Honor, the prosecutor turned to the judge, his voice resonating with renewed confidence. We request permission to present People's Exhibit 74, the cloud backup video recording from the Sycamore Ridge maintenance shed camera. Timestamp June 15th. The defense attorney leaped up, objecting vehemently. Discovery violation, unfair prejudice, lack of authentication. But the judge, her eyes fixed on the prosecutor, then on the suddenly terrified face of Judith Albright. And the sweating HOA President Martinez overruled him decisively. The jury will see this evidence. Proceed. The courtroom lights dimmed for the final time. The large monitors sprang to life, displaying a clear, high-definition video from the shed camera's perspective, looking out the doorway. It showed Rachael recycling peacefully. It showed Judith's aggressive confrontation in excruciating detail, her face contorted with fury. It showed the violent, unambiguous shift sending Rachael stumbling backward into the shed. It showed Judith slamming the door shut. Then, crucially, it showed Judith fumbling with her keys, unlocking the padlock, quickly reaching inside towards the camera, confirming the SD card removal, then relocking the door with grim finality before turning and walking away to start her live stream. The audio track captured Judith's hateful words, Rachael's initial cries of protest, and the definitive click of the padlock. It was utterly, devastatingly conclusive. But the cloud backup revealed something more. The system logs associated with the cloud storage also showed an administrative access attempt using HOA President Martinez's credentials just hours after Judith's arrest, specifically targeting the shed camera's cloud directory with a delete all files command. The command had failed due to multi-factor authentication Martinez apparently couldn't bypass on the vendor's secure server, but the attempt itself was logged, timestamped, and undeniable. Martinez had actively tried to destroy the backup evidence, proving his complicity in attempting to cover up Judith's crime after the fact. A collective gasp swept the courtroom. Judith Albright let out a strangled sob and buried her face in her hands. Martinez, in the gallery, looked physically ill, attempting to shrink down in his seat as deputies quietly moved to position themselves near him. The jury's deliberation was swift, decisive. Guilty. On all charges for Judith Albright. The judge immediately ordered HOA President Martinez taken into custody on charges of felony evidence tampering and obstruction of justice based on the cloud log evidence. Judith Albright received a sentence of 15 years in state prison, the judge citing her remorseless cruelty, the pattern of abuse, the targeting of a pregnant woman, and the calculated evidence tampering. Martinez, facing his own felony charges, quickly accepted a plea deal involving jail time, hefty fines, and permanent banishment from any HOA leadership role, his reputation ruined. Rachael, after weeks of nerve-wracking bed rest and monitoring, delivered a healthy, beautiful baby girl. The trauma cast a long shadow, but the unwavering support of Ben, their families, neighbors who finally felt safe to speak out against Judith's reign, and even sympathetic strangers who followed the case, fostered a deep sense of healing and resilience. Ben Carter returned to his vital work at Internal Affairs, his commitment to rooting out abuses of power now forged with a profoundly personal, visceral understanding of the harm unchecked authority, even at the most seemingly insignificant community level, can inflict upon the vulnerable. The Sycamore Ridge maintenance shed eventually received a new, standard lock, easily opened from the inside, its internal camera continuing its silent watch, no longer just guarding tools, but standing as a quiet, potent symbol of accountability finally, unexpectedly, and decisively served, thanks to the inescapable reach of the cloud. The neighborhood began the long process of rebuilding trust, dismantling the structures that allowed such tyranny to fester, hoping to finally live up to the promise of being a true haven.